You're listening to Short History Shorts audio, where history speaks louder than images. In the year 219 BC, on the eastern coast of Iberia, a single city stood at the crossroads of empire and ambition. Its name was Saguntum, a wealthy and fortified settlement with close ties to Rome, positioned just south of the Ebro River, which had been established as a vague line of control between Rome and Carthage. When Hannibal Barca, the brilliant and audacious Carthaginian general, laid siege to this city, he lit the fuse of one of the most devastating wars the ancient world would ever witness, the Second Punic War. But to understand why this siege sparked a global conflict, we must first understand the fragile peace that preceded it, and the growing tension between the two Mediterranean superpowers that would make any spark combustible. Following the end of the First Punic War in 241 BC, Carthage had suffered a humiliating loss. It had been forced to surrender Sicily, pay massive war reparations, and endure Roman interference in its overseas affairs. But while Carthage licked its wounds, it turned its eyes toward Spain. Hamilcar Barca, father of Hannibal, began building a new Carthaginian empire in Iberia, rich with silver, manpower, and strategic potential. His conquest laid the foundation for a revitalized Carthaginian state, independent of Roman harassment and anchored in Spanish wealth. After Hamilcar's death, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair continued the expansion, founding the great city of New Carthage and formalizing treaties with local tribes. One of those treaties, signed in 226 BC with Rome, established the Ebro River as the boundary of Carthaginian influence. Rome would not interfere south of the river, and Carthage would not cross it northward. But this treaty was ambiguous and had one fatal loophole. The city of Saguntum, though located south of the Ebro, was allied to Rome, but not formally annexed or protected by treaty. This legal gray area would become the spark of war. By 221 BC, Hannibal had succeeded Hasdrubal as commander in Iberia. Just 26 years old, Hannibal was already hardened by war, charismatic, and consumed by a hatred for Rome inherited from his father. He immediately resumed expansion, defeating hostile tribes and strengthening Carthage's hold on the region. But Hannibal also had a greater goal. He wanted to prepare for a new war against Rome, one that would avenge Carthage's earlier defeat. And Saguntum stood directly in the way of that vision. The Saguntines were nervous about Hannibal's rise. They feared for their independence and sent diplomatic appeals to Rome asking for protection. Rome, wary but cautious, offered only verbal reassurances and avoided formal alliances that would provoke Carthage. Hannibal, aware of the city's links to Rome, saw its continued resistance as a threat to Carthaginian authority in Spain and a test of Roman resolve. By attacking Saguntum, he could secure his flank, provoke Rome, and force the issue on his own terms. In the spring or summer of 219 BC, Hannibal laid siege to the city. Saguntum was well defended, positioned on a hill with strong walls and a determined citizenry. But Hannibal brought with him a large, battle-hardened army and a will to crush resistance. The siege dragged on for months, with fierce fighting, counterattacks, and diplomatic wrangling in the background. Rome sent ambassadors to Carthage demanding Hannibal be recalled, but the Carthaginian Senate, dominated by the Barca faction, refused. They claimed that Saguntum was within their sphere of influence, and Rome had no right to interfere. As the months passed, the siege grew bloodier. Saguntum's defenders fought with increasing desperation. There are reports of citizens melting their gold to fund the war effort, and of internal strife as hunger and exhaustion took their toll. The Roman Senate, preoccupied with other concerns and unsure how far they could push Carthage without triggering an unwanted war, delayed a full military response. And so, Hannibal continued to batter the city. Eventually, Saguntum fell. The Carthaginians sacked the city, executed its leaders, and seized its wealth. The survivors were enslaved or scattered, and the defiance of Saguntum was snuffed out. It was a brutal and total conquest, but the consequences of the siege were even more dramatic. In Rome, the Senate erupted in fury. Saguntum may not have been formally Roman territory, but its destruction was seen as a direct challenge to Roman prestige and power. Hannibal had ignored their warnings, defied diplomatic protocol, and destroyed a city under Roman protection. It was an open insult, and the Roman Republic could not let it pass unanswered. In early 218 BC, Rome sent a final embassy to Carthage demanding Hannibal be handed over for punishment. The Carthaginian Senate refused. With that, the Roman delegation turned to the assembled statesmen and declared that Rome had placed war or peace in their hands. Let them choose. The Carthaginians chose war. Thus began the Second Punic War, one of the most intense and destructive conflicts of the ancient world. Hannibal, already prepared for the eventuality, launched one of the most audacious campaigns in military history. He led his army, including war elephants, over the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and across the Alps into Italy. There, he would unleash chaos on the Italian peninsula, winning battle after battle at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. But the spark that ignited this firestorm was the siege of Saguntum. This siege was not just a local conflict, it was a calculated move in a broader geopolitical game. Hannibal knew what he was doing. He wanted to force Rome's hand, secure Carthaginian dominance in Iberia, and begin the great struggle that would define his legacy. Rome, equally, could not allow its authority to be questioned without suffering collapse among its allies and enemies alike. The siege also revealed the fatal weaknesses in diplomacy at the time: ambiguous treaties, slow responses, and the limits of international law in a world where might often made right. Saguntum paid the price for living between two powers, and for trusting that treaties alone could protect it. Its fall marked the beginning of a new and even bloodier chapter in Roman-Carthaginian rivalry. And while Hannibal's boldness would lead to years of terror in Italy, it was this calculated siege in a corner of Iberia that gave him the opening. In Roman memory, Saguntum became a symbol of loyalty, betrayal, and the high cost of hesitation. In Carthaginian terms, it was a necessary stepping stone, a display of strength and sovereignty. But for the people of Saguntum, it was a tragedy, one that ended their independence and doomed their city to historical infamy. The siege of Saguntum is a reminder that wars rarely start from nothing. They begin with choices, ambitions, provocations, and the collapse of compromise. When Hannibal brought his siege engines to the gates of Saguntum, he brought more than destruction. He brought history to a turning point. And as the walls of that city fell, so too did the last fragile peace between Rome and Carthage.